everybody. We are beginning. We are truly about to begin in the sense that I'm speaking officially and we are live streaming. We will have both a physical member of the panels and several panelists that will connect with us via Zoom. So hopefully all of us will be interacting in a hybrid way, but it will be perhaps a little bit of a challenge. So I invite all of us to be hybrid in our mindset. So we talk to each other, but we'll also do our best to communicate with our colleagues who are now appearing on our screens. So welcome also to our digital panelists. Very, very glad to see you all in the digital space. As we are beginning to re-enter the room, we are. I'm just going to say a couple of words how this panel is going to look like, because some things are not exactly as planned because of the extraordinary parliamentary session in the European Parliament. The two MEPs are not going to participate in the established ways. And again, it's part of these special circumstances that the entire event has been under the sign of. So at the very beginning, I would like to invite the representative of our catering company for today, We Exist, who hopefully is going to come very soon. His name is Obada. And I wanted also to take the advantage of hearing not only from Top Mantaz Abdoulaye, who was very, very insightful, but also from Obada, whose experience also with starting a business as a refugee from Syria, in this case, may illuminate some of the discussions. So after Obada's remarks, I will open the floor for a quick discussion, and each of us, all of us, will have a chance to chip in. And then we will also hear from a representative of the MEP Damian Berslager. Again, apologies for a mispronunciation. While Damian is still in the plenary discussion, he was able to delegate one of the members of his cabinet to speak on his behalf. And we will also have a video recording of the MEP Evin Inchit, who will also communicate her thoughts. And then we can go another round and comment on what the MEPs have presented. So that's kind of the setup. I hope everyone is on board with that. And without any further ado, I invite Obada to come here and share a couple of his thoughts. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is... Sorry? I will be standing like this in the phone. Hello, everyone. My name is Ubada. I come from Syria, from Damascus. I arrived to Belgium in 2015 after a long journey. I left Syria in 2012 when the war started. I stayed in Egypt, then I came here. I came through the sea as everyone. I tried 2 times to pass from Egypt. It didn't work out. We were sinking in the sea. Then the 3rd time I tried from Turkey, so I arrived to Greece. I took the whole route walking till I arrived to Belgium. I got my papers. I was super lucky because I got my papers in 4 months. I got my official statement, and I start looking for an apartment, start building my life, and start looking for a job because, like, in my country we cannot stay without work. We need to work, because working what keep us alive. I start applying here and there to a lot of companies, a lot of organizations who works in favor of newcomers. I was always refused, and the reason was like, we cannot hire you, you are Syrian. I got like this comment like more than 3-4 times, so at the end I was like, okay, I will start something on myself, on my own, to help myself and to help other Syrians who are in the same situation, because we are more or less all facing the same consequences of the trip here. I started We Exist from a little idea. There was a building, it's called the Quaker's House, who I know the director, and he told me that I can use the sale of the event to organize Syrian dinners at the beginning. We organized the first Syrian dinner. It started with 65 reservations. We started from mailing list who started from 70 people. Now we have more than 6,000 our mailing list. We continued developing our business to start doing catering services for professional and non-professional events. And we start taking restaurants in Brussels to do a day of their closure. We take the restaurant and we start opening day for us, like Syrian day. We did that in a couple of restaurants weekly in Brussels. Now we have our space. After 5 years, we opened our restaurant. Corona was destroyed us, but we are coming back strongly, hopefully, and it will be better than before. Our goal is to create job opportunities for Syrian newcomers who fled war and persecution. We will keep on doing that, and our food, it's all Syrian food. It's the food that we do, what our moms prepare at home, because actually my mom is who inspired me to start this initiative. It's been 8 years I didn't see her, so all of this reminds me about her all the time. Follow us on Facebook to know everything new about us, and please visit us, and if you need any catering or anything, we are here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Obada. I think it's just another example, a concrete example of many of the abstract topics that we discussed earlier, and also that Luca from DG Home also exemplified. This is about markets, labor markets. It is about initiatives. It's about also recognition. And this kind of, what we talked earlier, this kind of changed narrative about refugees and migrants, as opposed to be needy, so not needy, but entrepreneurial and full of initiatives and energy and people that give back just as much as they would be taking in this kind of exchange. So I think it's, I'm very thankful that both Top Manta and We Exist were able to be with us today, just to illustrate that what we are doing is not something abstract, even though of course it has a philosophical dimension, but it also has a human dimension, and just being reminded of this human dimension is what we are here for. And now I would like to switch on to this more general discussion that I signaled at the very beginning, and I will not be very schematic, but I'll try to give the word to everybody so that everyone will make sure that I'll make sure that everyone has a chance to intervene. And what I wanted to start with is, of course, a question that I already kind of hinted at in my conversations with you via email, something that is kind of making us look into the future, right? So we are 10 different Horizon projects. We all have studied aspects that are unique but also connected to each other. We can also discuss that a little bit later on. But the way I see, there are two main paths. One is the more pragmatic labor and economic and legal oriented, as one of the sessions was, and the other one is more cultural, about narratives and identities. And the two are not separated. I think this was very clearly so. I believe that it was Simone who was saying, like, or maybe it was Ricardo. I mix the two projects up, but I think both of them would support this idea that identities can be in the way of blocking access to labor markets. It's not pragmatics. It's not about rationality. It's about identities. It's about narratives of what is acceptable or not, and who you are. And again, I think Yussi was saying, 50 kilometers one side or the other of the border, you can either be in and considered totally normal and acceptable, and if you're on the wrong side of the border, you're totally not considered as belonging and as a good person. So going back to this idea, like if you were to simplify, and I know that we're academics, a lot of us, so we don't simplify very much, but let's make an effort in this case. If you were to think, what would be the ultimate recommendation that you would make, right? Would it be something to focus on the pragmatics? And I'm thinking about practical recommendation, because we're still a policy event. Would you recommend to decision makers, either at the European level or at any level that you have been working with, either local, I know many of you worked locally, some of you worked also pan-European outside even Europe with non-EU countries and so on. What would you recommend the emphasis to be on the more pragmatic, economic, labor market-oriented, this kind of benefit to the society? Like these are, let's think of the positives, the aging crisis, the labor shortage, these kind of, I would call pragmatic dimensions of the migration problematic. Or would you emphasize the more idealistic, if you wish, the identity, the human rights, the humanitarian, the national connections, this kind of the soft part of this dimension. So it's a dichotomy that I know it's very squared, and I already forewarned that I understand the two bleed into each other. But if you were pushed against the wall and you would have to choose one area of emphasis, which one would it be? And I'm just going to start with someone from the Zoom, just so that we make sure that they are feeling and included in our conversation. And again, we're very sorry you cannot be with us physically today. But Anneliese, would you be the first one to give us your opinion, in brief, of course?
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. Not so easy to be the first. Well, coming from our Welcoming Spaces program, and Ricardo is there with you, so that is helpful. Maybe I would like to start with a more ideological issue that was not mentioned today yet. And I think the situation that we are in at this moment makes us think about ourselves. And the title of this whole conference is Inclusive Europe. But the issue that I would like to raise is Inclusive Europe versus Fortress Europe, to start with. Because we very much now look into Europe. And I think also given all the things that are happening right now, and also the history, the recent history with Syria, Afghanistan, etc., Ukraine, etc., all the African migrants that keep coming, etc., should also make us think about our more global role. I think that Europe over the final decades has become very much Eurocentric, more and more. Our migration policies, we don't mention them today, with the externalization dimension, I think also is something that we should not forget about. So because I'm the first, I think that's the reason why I would like to start there, to contextualize the whole discussion as well. So especially now, I think we have to be very humble, much more humble than we have been for a long time. And I think the future is about also finding ways not only to take self-interest as our point of departure, but it is about solidarity, not only within Europe, because I also remember what was said in this morning. I don't know her name, who was from Poland, and also showed that there is, of course, also lack of solidarity within Europe, but also worldwide. And so whatever we do in the context of today's topic, we should not forget about that external dimension. And I would say, if I had the externalization policy of the EU, keeping migrants out, but not only by doing that, you of course put many more people at risk than before, is something that we should also be critical about. And also all the migration deals to make other countries responsible for what we do is an important element of what we should discuss today. Maybe I should stop here. I have many more practical and pragmatical things as well that have to do with ourselves, what we could do within Europe, but maybe just to set the tone, to stop here, if you...
Thank you very much for your intervention. Yeah. And if anyone else wants to comment directly on this point of the external versus the Eurocentric point of view, feel free to intervene. Is there anyone who wants to directly pick up on this idea? Yes, Hakan, please.
Thank you very much, Anamaria, for organizing this and bringing all of us 10 projects together. I think this is one of the unique moments in European research area history where so many projects come together to make a policy impact. Um, what Annelies took up as a starter was also partly also what I wanted to focus on here, because what happens at your borders becomes reflected also inside your country. When you give the message to your population that people should be kept away by using externalization policies, and they're expendable at sea when they're trying to reach your borders for safety, then this picture will be reflected in the opinion of your citizens, and discrimination processes will strengthen and be reinforced by the very actions of your states and of the European Union itself. So there's an interplay between the boundaries, what's happening at the boundaries, and what's happening inside the integration processes here. This is the one thing that I wanted to take up. And related to this, it's also important to remember, this is in relation to your question, being forced to the wall, to the corner, and having to choose between whether a human rights approach and discourse should be chosen, or the market-oriented logic, market-oriented integration of immigrants. I have seen some very good suggestions that sound very good when taken in an isolated way from the other dimensions. For example, one of them was about convincing the European populations that there are some areas of the economy in rural areas and etc. where migrants can be useful. So if citizens know about this, then we will also develop the attitudes to immigrants and immigration because they're useful. But there's a downside to that. What happens when they're not needed anymore in economic terms? What happens when we don't actually need their labor or whatever through their existence in our territories? This kind of thinking is a double-edged sword, and I think it should be abandoned for a more human rights and citizen rights approach. In my project, Protect, one of our findings is that the more inclusive citizenship notion a citizen has, the more he or she is inclined to accept helping refugees in danger by admitting them into their own country, into his own country. That is, we put them in a corner like you are doing to us now, Anamaria. We put our respondents into a corner and we ask them, there are 100 refugees that your country has to take. Which option do you prefer? Do you prefer paying another country to help those refugees? Or do you prefer admitting into your own country? And the more this was an experiment, and we gave different amounts of money to be paid to different groups, and the more the amount to be paid increased, the more the citizens were likely to accept admitting refugees. And the more inclusive citizenship notions they had, the more inclined they were to admit refugees. And the more nativist sentiments they had, the less they were inclined to accept refugees, and huge sums of money they were willing to pay for not admitting them to their country. So combined with the Ukrainian crisis that we're seeing here, two different groups of refugees are being treated very differently here, the Ukrainians and the Africans and Middle Easterners and etc. Others, non-Europeans. I think one of the advantages of the European integration history for Europe, the advantage for Europe, is that in order to consolidate the European population, the European Union promoted a territorial European identity. Whoever is the citizen of a European Union country territorially is also the citizen of the European and is also a European. And I think this is now helping us a little bit because Ukraine has been considered as a European country and there's a cultural and ideological dimension to that as well. If you you have released or you want to release your bonds to the Russia and former Soviet Union bloc, and if you are more for democracy, then you are more accepted as a European, and this is helping now. And it's also that these Eastern European countries of the European Union can identify more easily what's happening to the Ukrainians there. Okay, I will cut it here. Maybe we can build on that a little bit.
Thank you very much, Hakan. Excellent insights. I have already lots of ideas. I'm sure my colleagues also want the same thing. But before we go there, I would like to give the word to the representative of the Volt MEP, Damian Berselager. Her name is Kamila Solieva, and she is with us also via link. So, hello, Kamila. Can you hear us and see us? I hope we can also see and hear you. And you are very welcome to share with us the position that Damian would take on these matters. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, Anamaria. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Yes, perfect. Great. Thank you so much for the invitation. Many apologies from Damian, who could not join today. As you imagine, there's currently a lot of political debate, and we are currently having a plenary session on the situation in Ukraine. Therefore, he could not join as he had to attend the plenary session. So I hope here I will be able to convey some of the work we do as an office, together also with the Greens EFA group that we sit at the European Parliament with. So let me start off with talking about the most topical issue, that is the current tragic war and mass suffering in Ukraine. And we're very happy to see that Europe is finally acting in solidarity and with humanity, something very different to what we've seen over the past years. And we do believe that this positive welcomeness, positive narrative, and a positive showcase of solidarity should be extended and encouraged for the future, and also that the lessons learned and reflections we have in the current crisis can be applied in the future. I'll talk a little bit about this after I introduce a bit our work at the European Parliament, because I think this could be useful to shape the discussion. So in the European Parliament, Damian sits in 4 committees. And one of them is the Civil Liberties Committee, where we work on asylum and labor migration. I think the subject of narrative is very important, because that's actually something we often emphasize, that the narrative between asylum and labor migration must be different. These are 2 different subjects, where one is about people coming for opportunities and to be reconnected sometimes with their families, and the other one is people fleeing humanitarian disasters or people fleeing political violence. So these are 2 narratives that have to be delinked, and often in conversations with policymakers and politicians, we say this because what we hear is the mistake often of people mixing the 2 narratives, and clearly that's what media often does as well. So in the European Parliament on the labor migration part, we've worked on reforming the Blue Card Directive, which many of you know is the directive for the very small percentage of people, that is the highly qualified and highly skilled migrant workers that come to Europe or that already are in Europe. And whilst working on this regulation, we're very happy that we managed to enhance the rights of those living and those planning to come to Europe. And we believe that this type of reform is necessary, and it is important to ensure dignified treatment of migrant workers in the EU in order to improve their prospects for integration and social inclusion. We do believe that by enhancing and creating uniform EU rights-based framework, we could help to enforce the integration of migrant workers in Europe. And for instance, this could be by making sure that they have the right to family reunification. We heard a lot of cases of people that wait up to 2 and 3 years to get reunified with their families. Clearly, these are some of the rights that make the person who comes to Europe, an individual, feel like they're integrated and included and welcomed in Europe. And then in terms of our work on the asylum part, we have reformed the European Asylum Support Office, which is now the European Asylum Agency, which we're very happy and hope that this is the first step towards harmonizing the EU's approach on asylum. And something that we're actually proud to have been working in the past months is the crisis mechanism regulation, which I think many of you know about. It's not the most positive regulation that has been proposed, but we have managed together with our colleagues of the European Parliament to reform it in a much positive direction, where one of the things that we introduced was the prima facie refugee recognition. And this brings us a little bit towards what's happening in Ukraine right now. I just came out of the plenary debate, where President von der Leyen said that she will trigger a temporary protection directive, which is something that we've been working on extensively with, and also something that we're very happy that is happening nowadays. I mean, as some of you may know, temporary protection directive was created to respond to what has happened in Kosovo, and was never triggered before. So this is a historical moment, I think, for Europe in general as a whole. And this directive, I think, will ensure the very fast and swift integration of people coming to Europe by providing them with rights such as, housing, employment, access to employment, which is a very important right in order to get integrated and included in the society. As I heard Hakan, I managed to catch the last presentation of Hakan, and indeed, it is important that when we talk about those fleeing Ukraine, we speak of everyone irrespective of their nationality, gender or religion. And that is why at the moment, hopefully by Thursday, we will know, but hopefully the Temporary Protection Directive will cover people fleeing Ukraine and not only Ukrainian nationals, because this is important to note that Ukraine is a diverse country and includes nationals from all over the place, and therefore these nationals should be included in the scope because they are fleeing the same disaster as the nationals of Ukraine are. And I think in general, it's a little bit sad to see what's happening at the moment at the border, that there's a little bit of a discrimination between those that are Ukrainian nationals and those that are African students or other nationals. And therefore, we need to be very careful when forming our response and making sure that everyone feels welcome, and making sure that this narrative doesn't separate the two types of refugee categories, the good refugees, let's say, and the bad refugees, which I think Europe has been doing over the course of the past years. What have we been doing apart from the legislative work, what we have been doing as the office and also together with our group is working on a campaign. It's called Europe Welcomes Campaign. And there we noticed while working for the past 2.5 years that the narrative around asylum is extremely negative, and we wanted to showcase positive cases of people welcoming refugees and asylum seekers. And therefore, we have started this campaign called Europe Welcomes, which is an interactive map which shows all the cities across Europe that have expressed their willingness and welcomeness to welcome refugees and asylum seekers. And you would be surprised, we started off with, I think, our research of 300 countries and now cities, and now we have almost over 1,000 cities, which clearly shows that despite the political narrative that we hear from our leaderships, there is the will from citizens and there is will from mayors. I mean, you have the mayor of Budapest, you know, the mayor of Gdansk, obviously countries that are usually more anti-migration that say we want to welcome refugees. We have the capacity, and even if we don't, we have the will. And through this campaign, what we were trying to do is that we obviously saw the importance of cities, municipalities, and communes when it comes to asylum and integration. And this is outlined in the Integration Action Plan of the European Commission. So what we're trying to push for is that municipalities, cities, and communes are more included in the future asylum policy. Something surprisingly that and shockingly that we don't see, and I think we haven't reflected over the past 5 years of the developments of the 5 years, is that the new pact on asylum and migration does not at all mention the role of cities and municipalities, and this is surprising despite their commitment and despite their work over the past 5 years that we have seen. So we're trying together with our political party to push for the inclusion of cities and municipalities and to ensure that not only are they included symbolically, but they do receive funds from the EU, like EU funds, and have direct access to EU funds that would help to them welcome and to integrate asylum seekers and migrants. And these funds should not only focus, in our opinion, on asylum and migration and integration funds, it should go beyond that scope. Because when you welcome an asylum seeker and refugee, you are also expanding your capacity when it comes to schooling, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to infrastructure. So it is not only related to asylum, it is related to the work of your city or your commune as a whole. So we definitely think that this positive incentive should be used more in the future to ensure that more and more municipalities and cities become welcoming. And whilst working on this campaign, we have heard actually from many cities that they need migration. I mean, some cities are dying out because they don't have an active population. Most of their youth leaves to the urban areas. And therefore, I think this could be a win-win for everyone. And through these positive incentives, we can build towards a more positive narrative and therefore more positive framework on asylum in the future. And to answer one of the last questions that I think was asked for us to think about is what should be the priority of the EU? And this is one of the, I think, biggest questions, because I think there's so many things that the EU should prioritize. The first one is enforcing rules. If we see that member states are not abiding by the rules that we wrote, the Commission, as the guardian of the treaty, must be courageous and must feel comfortable in enforcing the rules that it has legislated and adopted. And this is with regards, I mean, this really spans to the current abuses we see in member states, including the very common ones we hear recently is the pushbacks, but it also comes to asylum procedures, to the application of different rules and standards. And we believe that the Commission here should play a stronger role. For instance, I think the recent cases would be, you know, there are certain laws in member states which legalize pushbacks, and we need to ensure that these laws are not, that they don't become the norm, that this is not how Europe speaks about migration, that we don't normalize this deterrence policy and deterrence by suffering policy. The second priority should be, of course, reforming the system, because currently we do see some form of a non-system. And when we're talking about reforming the system, we're talking about the solidarity framework. There clearly is a lack of solidarity. What we're seeing here right now, even with Ukraine, is that we have a lot of the heavy load being carried by the member states that are neighboring with Ukraine. However, for the future, in the midterm, we really need to ensure that this responsibility is shared across the EU, that we act as a union and in solidarity with one another when dealing with asylum and when dealing with crises at our borders. And this requires the reform of the solidarity framework that is currently in place. And finally, it's integration, something that we see, for instance, for our work in Greece, and this is a very obvious example, is that people, either people are pushed back or they receive asylum status. But when they receive asylum status, this does not necessarily mean that they're going to have access to employment, that they're going to have access to social security, that they're going to be able to be integrated. This is a whole new process. And what we see often is that, unfortunately, when they get a refugee status, these people are left behind. They don't have a system that guides them on how to integrate and include themselves in the society. And here we really need to make sure that we encourage and that we put pressure on member states to develop their integration plans, to work more on integrating refugees and migrants in their society, because integration is the responsibility of the person that comes, but it's also as much of a responsibility of the society that welcomes them. And therefore, we need to take this responsibility and ensure that people that come here feel welcomed, but also are integrated so that they can enrich our societies, which they do with their cultures and their contributions in the future. I think I will stop here, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Camila. I don't know if we have too many questions, but I definitely can say that the type of priorities that you guys have and your focus, for example, on local levels, or the focus on integration through equal shared responsibility. I think these are things that we have already heard about this morning from several projects that focused specifically on communities that are European communities that are now depopulated or at risk of depopulation, and we also heard about research about these narratives and how we can change them. Like, I think all the projects here are partly dealing with that. So in a sense, your work on the political level very much ties in with our work on the research level. So maybe the one question that I have for you is whether when you perform your political work, if you are aware of or work with research projects such as some of us who are in the room today, or in other words, if you find that our outcomes would definitely speak to the same issues that you have outlined in your presentation, if you are reached by, let's say, the outcomes of the research we produce, and if so, how you find them, and if not, why not?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. I mean, I think in general, our work is very much shaped by the contributions and the expertise of the civil society, as well as academics working on these issues. And we're very grateful for the work that you conduct, because obviously without this knowledge, this vast knowledge, and this resource capacity, we would not be able to do the work that we do. So indeed, when working on the policy issues, and actually the way we came into this whole local dimension is through the project, through discussions with Zeebrücke, which was one of the movements in Germany, and there after thereon, we were exposed to more movements like that across Europe. So yes, I mean, it seems like there's movements and there's work being done on different levels, and we're very happy that there's so many voices. And with our work, we want to contribute and even potentially coordinate these voices and bring them on EU level rather than compete with them. So obviously, what we try to do when we're working is to take the learnings and the findings of different civil society organizations and academics and then apply them to our work and as much as possible. And thankfully, I mean, our as many of you know, probably Greens are very much always open and actually often are in discussions with stakeholders in different civil society movements. So we are on regular basis being aware of what different organizations are doing. And we try to apply as much as possible these learnings in the political language that we can.
Thank you very much. If anyone else has a question for Camilla, now it's a moment to intervene. Yes, Maria?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. Well, learning is a kind of input, right? And policy outcomes is the output. Do you have any mechanism for evaluating outcomes? Or you just, formulate priorities? Do you have any way to see what has worked well or,
I think legislating is like one of our priority outcomes, let's say. So this is how we measure success and to see how significantly we manage to improve the legislations. But of course, in terms of its application and implementation, that is very much behind the Commission's work. So we do follow it, but that is a more medium-term, long-term project. And therefore, we do engage a lot with the Commission to understand how these rules and outputs, let's say, that we have created together or co-legislated together with the Council have been evaluated and how are they working in practice. But I think with outputs, it's a long-term exercise and it takes time and patience to see what has actually worked and what hasn't worked. But personally, in our office, we measure success by seeing whether we have managed to significantly improve. And usually the Parliament thinks, usually the progressive groups in the Parliament think from the perspective of the migrant or the asylum seeker. So we always assess how we managed to improve or either not improve at all the situation for the people on the ground.
Thank you. And Annelies, you had also a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, to give follow-up to indeed what was said in the beginning, you highlighted also that you actively also try to change the narrative by showing all the positive examples of welcoming spaces. And I know that, well, our own program, but also Mathilde and others, we all do the same. At the same time, do you have an idea how come that we, in spite of having all those examples, do not manage or did not manage yet to mainstream that? So where it comes to mainstreaming, because that is one, I have the feeling that at this moment, there's a kind of momentum because it is no longer an abstract topic because of COVID-19, for example, but all those migration flows, etc., and also the flash floodings in Europe. We now, citizens are more aware than ever how important mobility is and how it is to be locked in, etc. So given that there is momentum and given that we now all have all those examples of welcoming spaces, what could we do to mainstream it in such a way that every time that in the media it is shown that there is no political support, etc., for migration, that we can tackle that? That is my question, how to make this indeed really now contribute to a new narrative where the normal is that, of course, people flow in, flow out, and we create space for that.
Annalise, I think this is a $1 million question that everyone's working on this topic asking themselves. I agree with you that despite the positive work we're all doing, it seems like the process is much more tedious. And even though I think, in my opinion, a positive narrative must match positive actions. And at the moment, we do have a positive narrative. Also, I mean, we do try to promote a positive narrative with many actors, and including the EU, for instance. Like, if you listen to the European Commission, it often does try to promote that migration is normal, that, you know, we need migration, etc. However, this must be met with positive and sometimes bold actions too. And here I think narrative has to match very much legislation and reform. And whilst we say migration is normal, we're also at the same time, let's say on the other hand, for instance, like Europe is also at the same time legalizing pushbacks, saying that it's not pushbacks, but it is unauthorized movements, you know, so it's preventing unauthorized movements. So on the other side, there's another narrative that is working against us, that is actually justifying certain actions and saying, this is normal, this is how it should be. So whilst I think we're doing a lot of work, there's still a lot of work to be done, and our words must match our actions, and Europe's words must match Europe's actions. And I mean, how we can mainstream them.
But that is
I think
exactly what
often
you
we look, yeah.
what you are referring to is exactly what I try, which was brought in before. There's a complete mismatch between our external policies, etc., and what we expect citizens to do. And so maybe there we should also make a connection rather than only showing positive examples of who good citizens are. And so that sorry, I don't know the name of my previous, the person who came before, after me, but I see that as an issue to be tackled by policymakers.
No, 100%. And this is where we really are trying, but unfortunately, policymakers come from different political groups which represent different ideas, and that's often a very, very difficult task to do. And indeed, as you said, like there is a very much a mismatch, and there is on the other side a different narrative that is justifying the actions that we do, you know, that is justifying Fortress Europe. It doesn't call it Fortress Europe. It doesn't call it pushbacks. It uses more creative words to make it sound legally okay with what policies Europe is undertaking. And unfortunately, while we're saying, I mean, the very stark example is like, while we're saying that we need migration, migration is great. On the other hand, we are, Europe's inflicting mass suffering on our external borders. So there's clearly a very big difference between with what we're saying and what is happening on the ground. And I think what so far media has successfully actually done lately is to show the gaps that are happening on the ground and to showcase how citizens' money are being used to sponsor such policies. And I think this is actually something we're trying to work with our political group now, is to look more also into the funding aspect, because this is something very difficult, in my opinion, for many to comprehend, as EU funding can be a very much a huge puzzle and a big dilemma. And we're trying to show that that you know, EU citizen taxpayer money are being used for such deterrence policies. And how to mainstream it, I think I would definitely suggest that a lot of the actors working on migration and asylum, that we learn probably from climate activists on how to mainstream it. I mean, if you looked at climate emergency just 10 years ago, it was not so mainstreamed, and nowadays it is. And use innovative tools or tools that are famous in campaign strategies to try to mainstream the subject. But it is a $1 million question, so I don't think I will manage to fully answer it. I'm just trying to explain to you how we are trying to add our contribution into this whole fight on the narrative.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Camila. Any other questions? Not. You have a question? A question? You see? Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. There have been so many interesting points already that I wrote notes here. I don't know if I'm able to capture all of these, but the mainstreaming part is a crucial question, and of course the most difficult to answer. I think one step to that direction is that we should seek to broaden the circles to whom we communicate with. In here, for example, of course, it's natural that we have projects who think alike, more or less, and I get the sense that much of the audience here as well think alike. So it's rather easy for us to agree on the key principles, how to proceed. But quite often we, and including myself, we fail to communicate with those who do not agree with this. And I think this is the key challenge, that we quite often use this collective we when we talk about migration. At the same time, it's very easy to know that there are a lot of people in our societies, whether the European society or more national societies, who think very much the different way. And I think this is the key challenge, that Europe has become increasingly internally torn. And perhaps Putin's actions are actually helpful in this regard, that we get more united, but both during the so-called refugee crisis and then the COVID pandemic, it was very easy to see that the national societies were not as coherent as we often depict them to be. And if I can make one more comment, and this was a very good question that Hakan pointed out in asking that, in reference to the point that's made earlier, that many of our regions, be they cities or be they rural areas, really need migrants. But he asked what happens when they are not needed anymore? And I think this is a fundamental question. But I think it's more complex than that at the same time. So I agree and disagree at the same time. Because to me the question is, who gets to decide that when they are not needed? And quite often we still talk about, especially if we talk in terms of integration, be it two-directional or one-directional, still we rely on these key binaries with two groups of people, which are incredibly diverse. The migrants versus then whatever the other group is, locals, some call them natives. And to me, I don't understand either of these groups. And this is the problematic part. In my sense, the attention needs to be in trying to, first of all, diffuse these binaries, the social borders between these two groups. And to answer Hakan's question would be that the question when they are not needed anymore needs to be made useless, because at that point they don't exist, but they have become part of we. And this is the redefining of us that does not need to align with the traditional state-centric way as we continue to think about. I've got a microphone, but I'm done. No,
Bad
thank
timing.
you very much. Maybe this was a hint.
Sorry about the short technical hiccup with the microphone. I think we have a comment from Alaji, and then we have Ainoa on my list. Please, Alaji.
Yes, thank you everyone. It's my pleasure to be part of this discussion, and I just want to say that I am a student here learning from all the previous presenters and the projects that came. So I would like to a little bit summarize the points that have been said, because I think that the priorities have been mentioned. So maybe we should go around to see how to match these priorities. From my experience as other people with migrant background mentioned here, I think if I am asked, and let's say that I am asked to say what is the priority for many migrants that I see in the street, desperate on the unbelievable, deplorable conditions that we are all explaining about, I will mention directly that the most important need is to recognize the skills, the previous experiences, and to make these experiences and skills useful for the migrants themselves within the contexts they find themselves. And this has been mentioned in a way on by Luca, the DG Home, when he mentioned that the AMIF project wills to open the labor market. But how is the question? It must start from the first day of entrance of migrants, when they would be asked what skills do they have, what do they want to do, what are their previous experiences, and this could be done. I mean, there is no magical formula to fit everything, but the EU skills profile tools is there. It's a very extensive file anyway that goes to look at every skill and previous experience that you might gain. But I think there is the problem of implementation, as been solicited by Luca. We have to get to business people. We have to get to these communities to make use of this. And this is, as Camila mentioned, a win-win situation, and as also by other previous speakers, because Europe is undergoing an aging population, and what the recent speaker just said, it's not about the useful or uselessness of migrants alone, but the technological divide that is threatening every one of us. We have to improve continually. So this would lead to like acquisition of a lot of competencies that is already we don't have as other people who don't feel in. So we have to work on the vulnerabilities. And in this class, I would give priority to the women. Migrant women are coming from very strong cultures where gender role is strong. Most of the time when they find themselves in the new contexts, they are easily marginalized. They are easily left outside. They are in, but still outside. And after the women, I would come to children. And this has been also outlined a little bit by Lucas' presentation, in the sense that we have to see children from migrants as needing, this adjusting, even though they are born here or they are coming, they have all the experience, they still need to be part of this society. They need to, and even their parents themselves, because integration should, in fact, any model that we want to create might, in fact, use these children to create that model. Let them not feel themselves as inside but outside. And with this, I would like to integrate it finally with the previous speakers, with Annelies and Hakan, who were talking about, I think you posit what is, I would call, the humanization of the securitization approach, the bureaucratization of the migration approach that is reducing in the first place the benefits of migration itself. So in my sense, all these things when put together, both from my perspective as a practitioner with migrant background, because I am saying this basically because both my research and the research I am taking part now is influenced by my personal experience, like the top Manta Abdullah was saying, there is actually need to go and see what people are suffering from as a result of syndemic vulnerabilities. There is, in fact, difficult to prioritize one thing here. We should look at a holistic aspect of how to bring these vulnerabilities into one ladder and call it syndemic and use a systematic approach to solve them. Because if our efforts continue to be divided and we see that we see that these things are disjointed, then we will always continue in the circle of talking about these problems, and then we can, in fact, go forward to see the last conclusion, which is trauma of migration. I found this very interesting because I also think that is a little bit oversighted in our discussion. And trauma, when we look at it in migration, we should also look at it from the approach of not only what migrants have undergone, what has happened to them, but actually what they are undergoing. It is not a post-traumatic trauma or post-traumatic disorder that migrants face or that I face, but it's a persistent traumatic disorder that people face as a result of racism, discrimination, no prospect because of these institutional and structural problems that are still existing within which we work and program our future orientations. So I think this has been the result of perceptions project that migrants are suffering from syndemic vulnerabilities, and acting to one does not solve the whole at all. I see this also from Mikado so close, all the presentations so far that I followed this morning. I think we have underlined these priorities, but we should match them together and work towards a much more sustainable humanitarian and something that we are all proud of tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alaji. Ainoa is next on my list, and then I see the raised hands on Zoom as well. So, but Ainoa was on my list next, and then I have Hakan, and then I have Peter. So, Ainoa, please.
Yes, thank you, Anamaria. In fact, I wanted to reply to your.
I think it's, something is not working exactly right. So, if you don't mind using this slide.
I wanted to reply to your question, but I really won't, because I mean I'm here representing So Close about sharing heritage, so I should go for the more cultural symbolic aspects, but I won't, because I'm a very practical kind of person, so in that sense. In our project focused on cultural heritage, I would like to highlight like 3 ideas. One is the idea that cultural heritage is not just about food and music, which is great, but also about sharing past memories, about sharing history. And sometimes this is more difficult because when we enter in those aspects, we start to enter in some tensions in between different perspectives, but also we have to confront the paper, the role Europe has played in some of those countries in the past, and this is not so comfortable as other things. In fact, in my previous intervention, they were talking also about the idea of not only refugees, in this case, not only seen as victims, but also as agency and the role they play. And also it appears as important, it appeared in our fieldwork, the idea that refugees were not born when they arrived to Europe. They were not born when they started their journey. They were born much earlier, so it's important to talk about that past also, because it also helps to see refugees as an heterogeneous community or heterogeneous people with different ideas, different past, different experiences, and that's important. So going back to your question, I think what we have to see, those 2 aspects, more practical issues, or more, although I don't like that dichotomy, is how they go together, or they are intertwined, because, and this is something that appeared also in our project, when, depending on which housing policies you implement, if you implement housing policies in which refugees are allocated more concentrated or more separated from the rest, from the host population, those sharing spaces, those opportunities for mutual understanding are going to be reduced. So I think, or with childcare, which appeared as something important, because if we don't have early childcare services, usually women will stay at home for more years and will have less opportunities to communicate, to share spaces, to learn the language with the host societies. So more than one or the other, what I would say is how one can help the other, or how we have to take them into account as a part of a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ainhoa. On my list, I had Hakan and after Peter. So Hakan, please.
Thank you. Well, concerning the creation of a narrative, it's just to listen to the citizens. We conducted a survey of 26 countries with 27,000 people. 20 of those countries that we focused on were European countries. 66% of the people whom we asked questions to are supportive of international collaboration on protection of refugees, and 62% of Europeans in those 20 countries want to admit rather than pay refugees into their countries. And when you also look at their citizenship discourses, there is a significant majority that is for inclusive citizenship practices and inclusive citizenship ideas. So I don't believe when a politician says that I have to follow the instincts and preferences of my constituency. It is the elites and politicians that are the problem here. It is not the citizens. Citizens are more inclusive than today's political elites.
Thank you very much, Hakan. This is also something that probably begs continuation. I think there's something that probably we will need to pick up a little bit later. So make everyone who wants to comment on this, they can make note. But in the meantime, while we think of what we can address this very important issue, I give the word to Peter.
Okay, is that working or do I have to?
I don't know. Is it? It should be good.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, fine. I'd like to pick up on that because that's an enormous point, and I think it's wrong because I.
Sorry, we don't hear the speaker well.
I guess you'll have to go this route. No problem.
Okay, fine. So I'd like to pick up on that, but I think that's an enormous point that we could talk about for hours, and I think it's wrong because yes, it is true that the majority of the citizens are a particular way, but in the end of the day, politicians, with limited exceptions, work within proportional representation systems. And what we've seen is the ability of the margins to drive a discourse. And we'd like to wave a wand and change the nature of politics in Europe, but that's beyond our competencies. What I would say, though, in terms of the narrative point, is and it's the answer to the question about the pragmatic versus the idealistic. I would say that's the wrong way of framing it. It's actually practical. European identity, insofar as people talk about it, is something which is now assumed by many generations. And it's assumed because they've lived it. And I think one of the major lessons of the last 10 years, as I said earlier today, is that the reality of the discourse at a societal level has moved on. But at an elite level, it hasn't moved on, which is a similar point, but different enough from what Hakan was saying. And that a lot of people are just getting on with it. But the problem is, and this is where the practical points is, we know what to do. As in, I think one of the overwhelming points from the research projects, the 10 here and the many that have been done before, as well as all of the projects that are done that do not involve us, and also the enormous amount of integration research which emanates from outside of Europe, that we know what to do. As in, we know how to have more inclusive societies. We know how to be more welcoming. We know how to have a two-way integration. But we rarely get down to focusing on what we can do. And so, for example, if we look at AMIF, the overwhelming bulk of AMIF's funding goes to the initial reception phase, and it goes to the provision of legally required supports. A tiny amount of it goes to the things that actually make the difference, and which is, in terms of our work, where, as I was saying, is we're combining a look at the classic socioeconomic indicators with socio-psychological ones. It is the quality of interaction between the arriving community and the receiving community that we find the richest potential. And I think the next phase in terms of the discussion has to be how much we are missing in terms of the potential for our societies when we miss this. And if we were to do something, if we were to have a priority for the next 5, 6 or 7 years, according to the action plan, it would have to be to get serious about this interaction. Because at the moment, the overwhelming bulk of integration work happens to the side. It is something which institutions and organizations do with, hopefully with, sometimes they don't actually engage, or often they don't engage the arriving community. But it's to the side of the society, and it's about getting people ready to participate in this set entity. And the dynamic element is missing. Where it happens, it's fantastic. It makes a huge difference and it moves things on. At the moment, it happens in a way which is quite marginal. It's in large cities, it's large cosmopolitan cities, frankly, and it is largely not connected to formal integration work. It's largely people getting together and doing things. And so if we were to have a priority, I think it would be to get serious on this interaction between the two communities and build it as an absolute requirement into everything. As in, so in every funding application, in every assessment, in every speech, in everything, it is that which has to be the priority, because we know that the more the two communities know each other, the more they like each other, the more they learn from each other, and the more we move on.
Very, very strong points there, and again, another way that would probably give rise to many other comments. But I think next on my list I have Carla and then Camila. If you want to be next, have you? So Carla.
This work?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So I just want to keep it quick also because it's been so enriching already what has been said, and I don't want to repeat, the many points. I agree with the panel, but. I think there is two points I can think of adding. One is about the practices, especially practices of research. There's some things that do work, co-participation, co-creation works, but it needs to be designed from the beginning and funded from the beginning in a way the participation of migrants or ethnic minorities can be substantial. Not just, I've done this work and I know how it happens, but if we look at us critically, we get paid. And the migrants and the ethnic minorities, the vulnerable groups, they give their time for free. I think there's just something to think about that, how we train our participants so that they can effectively contribute, and how the participation has to be recognized at the same level as researchers. Then there is the question of sustainability and uptake activities that have to accompany a lot of, all our projects. And this goes back to many of the questions that the panel and yourself have raised. We have produced so much. Where is the database? How do we know, our Mikado app, how is the European Commission informed? Apart from, of course, the report that we write, but this seems to be like an exercise in itself. Sustainability, uptake, and my final point really quickly is that we all have the impression that we are talking to each other, we're doing so much for so long, but where are the outcomes? There are crisis after crisis, long-term, short-term solution to efforts have to be directed. Ultimately, my impression is experiencing for over 20 years of field work with migrants, being a migrant myself, is that without the legal status recognition, there is no solution to any of these problems that we're trying to fight. Legal status has to be streamlined, it has to be transparent, it has to be fair. And I don't think we have achieved that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Again, many things to jot down or commit to memory. Camila, would you like to come in and comment on this point? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave this fruitful discussion, but it's been very interesting, and I think there are many takeaways for our work. As final observations, and also listening to everyone's contributions, I just want to summarize some of the thoughts that we have. The first one is I think the negative narrative has been shaped by the lack of system, of a functioning system currently in Europe. And that is, we see the prevalence of non-system, the images of chaos at our external borders, the images of mismanagement. And therefore, one of the priorities for us working in the next remaining 2.5 years would be to create a fair and efficient system. And at the moment, I think this possibility is becoming, unfortunately, a little more and more bleak, but hopefully we can manage to succeed in the next 2.5 years to create such a system, because non-system leads to populism and to rise of information that is usually false, and this perception of chaosness. The second one is I really like this point about skills. I mean, in the European Parliament, we have been pushing for the European Migration Code, which would focus on creating EU rights-based framework and regular pathways for those wishing to come to Europe for work and opportunities. And when we've been working on this subject, through some time, we realized that it helps to talk about talent. I mean, and talent can be of different nature. It can be, people contributing to low wage sectors, medium wage sectors, or high wage sectors. We shouldn't be starting to approach it on a sectoral basis. But what we noticed is when we talk about talent, there's an openness to talk. And here, I think, to one of the speakers that made a contribution in the panel, in the live panel, it was really helpful in engaging non-traditional actors. When we spoke to employers and to founders, we realized that the word talent, and even to other ministries, actually, when you don't talk to a ministry of, for instance, migration or interior, the word talent works much better. And I can see that actually the Commission has picked up this narrative as well, and lately has been talking about talent and skills, which I think is a positive narrative that we should nourish further. And as a final point, indeed, I think when we're working on any policy or on any narrative, we need to ensure that we always involve and give and ensure that there's an agency of migrants themselves, because their stories, their life experiences, and their hurdles going through the administrative, barriers, or be it going through the very difficult systems, is what can give us powerful argumentations to push for more and to say what you're saying is actually bullshit. The truth is this, and we can see, and we have real life examples of this happening. So I think I will end with this, but thank you so much for inviting us, and I hope we really hope that we can get more studies and thoughts on this very educational subject, and see how we can improve our narrative further in our work.
Thank you very much, Camila, for being with us. And yeah, we will be able to send you a report from today's event so you can follow up with the rest of the project activities. Continue debating in the Parliament and give our best to Damien. Bye-bye. And now returning to the panel, I think Mikkel had the word. So Mikkel, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to share our experience also in interaction in the project. We've been talking about integration and who is us and who is they and who needs to be integrated. And in our case, for example, in co-creating opera, here again, we were talking about a big institution, 175 years old, about, I mean, as Liceu, with a lot of background in cultural application. And they want to do a community opera involving all the neighborhood. And this really, I mean, there's an imbalance between the forces of who is tractioning the thing, who is driving the issues, and how do you want to approach there. And we discovered and we learned that there is a lot of work really doing the community dialogue, building a trust that it needs to be between the neighbor, the organizations, and so on. And you really need to provide them something to trust them, and they really need to be that are part of that. So this trust and this trying to balance the forces is completely relevant, so they can build a long-term trip, which is not going to be affected by, I don't know, a bad relation that could come because they have other expectations, because they are feeling just, because they are, and that's a very good risk, because even if you have good intentions, if you are the big institution there, it's difficult to be in their own feeling and in their own perspective, and to really provide what they are expecting to. So I was thinking about how this could be translated to the policy things and so on. And I think that really, for example, you were saying about the balance between the funding. We need to really also think about not funding some to integrate the others, but trying to balance also where the funding is, who is structuring the project, and try to not create they and us, but to create something that really the interactions and creating the policies from the very beginning, create something that will be based on trust. And for me, the trust, going very back to the first question that you were saying, is the conceptual approach or the narrative or something more important than the actions. And the really, for the trust thing, is the actions have to be connected with the message that you are saying. Because if there is a non-connection between what you are doing, what you are saying, and what they are perceiving, and those messages, that's not going to work. So yeah, that's what we experienced in the project, and that's how we believe it could be translated to those policies more in an overall perspective. Although I am a technologist, and that's just my very, humble perspective on our view.
Thank you very much. I think now it's time to present the brief intervention from the other MEP who is directly in the parliamentary extraordinary session. But Evin sent her intervention as a short video, and I'm hoping that we are able to show it to all of us. So just a couple of seconds to make this transition to the intervention. Yes, there she is. So please.
Dear all, I want to apologize for not being able to participate in person today. The horrifying war in Ukraine has turned a lot upside down. The European Parliament is today gathering for an extraordinary plenary session, during which we will pass a resolution about the recent deteriorating situation and have a discussion. The Russian invasion in Ukraine is an unprecedented attack on our rule-based global order and marks the end of peace in Europe, which we will need to do everything we can to turn it around. Russia's unjustified attack on Ukraine has and will unfortunately displace hundreds of thousands of children, women, and men in Ukraine, in the neighboring countries, and beyond. I welcome that member states that usually takes a hard line against migration are showing a different attitude and approach and a new willingness to step up their responsibility for Ukrainian refugees and migrants. Important to note, however, is the concern that countries seems to make a distinction between persons fleeing persecution, and some nationalities seems to be considered more worthy of international protection. This is, as you all know, a violation of Geneva Convention and a racist approach that could not be tolerated anywhere at any time. But perhaps this could be the start of a new era and approach to migration in the European Union, where all the member states takes common responsibility for people in need. Because one thing is clear, the European Union must find a joint way forward for migration and asylum policies and integration and inclusion. This is why I welcome Commissioner Ylva Johansson's new pact on migration and asylum. The European Union can no longer afford to not have a responsible migration and asylum policy. Ultimately, this is about humanity and life, and we should never forget the historical reason of the Refugee Convention. International law must be respected. Migrants and refugees hold their rights, and we must never fail those. A solid common migration and asylum policy in the EU will also ensure that countries cannot choose themselves which refugees are worthy of international protection and who are not. The new Pact on Migration and Asylum need to ensure safe and legal pathways and common responsibility where all the member states take common responsibility. And it also needs to include and ensure a good integration and inclusion by our new inhabitants and citizens. The Migration Pact takes a holistic approach to migration processes. Countries that welcome persons in need should receive support. It is time that we give emphasis to the integration processes and inclusion processes and provide meaningful chances for people to create new opportunities as inhabitants and citizens. Both society and the individuals benefit from a quick integration and inclusion. My hope are that in this crisis, the European Union will learn from its previous mistakes and act in the name of humanity. This means working together to ensure that all people in this world can access their rights as enriched in international frameworks. Once again, I apologize for not being able to join these discussions in person, but I wish you fruitful discussion and day. Thank you.
All right. Our discussion is indeed approaching kind of the end of it, but we cannot leave without maybe addressing the situation in Ukraine, as Evin's comments kind of point into that direction. And then my question would be to all the panelists, a very brief answer though. I've been saying very brief the entire day from morning to evening, but it's in the interest of giving everyone a voice. Do you foresee this situation to become a new, let's call, migration crisis? We have called it migration crisis in 2014-15. Because of a certain number of influx, but also of a tragedy of war across the Mediterranean. Are we going to talk about this particular situation right now as a migration crisis, or is it so that this time is different, let's say? And if you think either way, why do you think so? Again, like a quick argument. Whoever wants to start. Yes, Peter.
Very quickly. We shouldn't call it a crisis. The last one wasn't a crisis. People predicted a crisis and it wasn't there, and it framed the debate in a way which was entirely destructive. It is a significant challenge because of the concentration of the scale and concentration of the numbers involved, but it's not a crisis. To borrow a quote, we can cope. And we should approach it and all similar migration situations in the same way, because fundamentally the dynamics do remain the same, that we will still need to respect the culture of those who are coming, which is not the same as all of ours. We still have the same issues in relation to long-term legal status. We still have the same issues in relation to housing, social welfare, health rights, language, which is a big thing, and of course the rest of the integration thing. So it isn't a crisis, and we shouldn't call it one.
Thank you. Yeah, you see?
I think it was a crisis, but it was not a refugee crisis or a migration crisis.
That's fair, yeah.
It was a crisis management crisis. It was a crisis of political will. I think it was something that was certainly a challenge, but should there have been a political will to address that in an appropriate way, the richest and wealthiest continent on this earth could have easily handled that. And I think, to answer your question, I think we learned something from that. And I already now see that there is a completely different political will to address the situation as it is now. I haven't followed the news today, so I wonder if there's something going on that I should know. But I get the sense that the political will is completely at a different level than it was back then in 2015, 2016.
Yes, Maria?
Yeah, just want to say that in relation to the Ukrainian case, I think it goes beyond migration issue. It has to do with a really peculiar moment for humanity. So it's going rather, in ways that we cannot, it's not easy to predict. But I would like to pick up what Camilla said earlier concerning the issue of talent. Coming from Sirius, we conducted fieldwork and interviews with social partners. And social partners, not in all countries, are doing enough in order to help migrants to integrate into the labor market. And I think this is something that we should, emphasize and also encourage the trade unions and the business organizations to work more with the migrants themselves and also provide more opportunities for voice and representation. And another thing, for me, the labor market integration is very important because it's, a way to become more integrated into the society as a whole. And I would agree with Peter earlier when he mentioned the issue of implementation. What we have found in Sirius is that there are specific barriers to a labor market integration that have to do with skills, language, the legal system, legal barriers, legal obstacles, but also questions of vocational education training. These are common findings. I mean, all the projects have arrived to the same recommendations. So policymakers really know what to do, but actually they don't do it. I mean...
This was one of the questions that I had also for both Luca and Camila. Like, do you know it? And anyway, so it's interesting in which way, like this exercise today is probably one such attempt to reach outside our academic project bubble. I know not all of us are necessarily academics, like work in other aspects. They are in companies and so on, but like work within the academic frame and trying to reach there. And obviously there seems to be a willingness on every side. That notwithstanding, there still seems to be like a disconnect. So perhaps we can think about that further, in which way we could reach out. Yes, any other comments? I think we have Alagi, and then we have Annalise. Yes, Alagi?
Yes, I just want to acknowledge the previous statement by the previous speakers about that we shouldn't fall in the trap of framing this thing as a crisis. There has never been a crisis when we look at the quality, when we look at the numbers of people who are coming in and the resources that are available in Europe. It is shameful to call this a crisis because it means that we are kind of initiating a self-fulfilling prophecy that if another person add up to the number of people that we have, then it is supposed to be. And then this brings in an emergency approach. And since 2015, migration has been approached as an emergency. And then this serves as a justification for a lot of institutions that work in the sector. So I feel that what we face now, if there is a crisis, is a moral crisis, a spiritual crisis. And this is to be done at an individual level. We all have to work at our own level, individual level, so that we can work collectively and bring up a community that is going to work on the European morals, and which are also universal morals of human rights, of respect, that the MEP Rosa was mentioning. How do we create a fertile ground that even if we are not in this world anymore, we will be happy that, yes, this fertile ground is there and it will move forward. So this is why I think the framing is very important. Let us not end up in calling this one also as a crisis.
Thank you. Yes, and Annalisa?
Yeah, thank you very much. I started very general and at a macro level, but maybe as a final issue, which has to do with creating crisis or not, I would like to refer to the need to stop that top-down quota-driven policies, which can be the cause of crisis. Because if you look at all the conflicts and tensions that emerged also in the past, it is to a large extent a reflection of how we deal with the issue. And on the one hand, we don't ask migrants indeed who they are and what kind of contributions they can make. So that is one side of the medal. On the other side, we should also not blame communities that are afraid, because in the current system, there is hardly any attention or time for hosting communities to get used to the idea that there will be people coming in. So I very much support what was said earlier about the need to bring communities together in such a way that they become we indeed. And in order to achieve that, and maybe also as a way to mainstream the new narrative, if, for example, from now on, it would be much more bottom-up, and indeed, rather than having a quota, and that feels as a punishment, if you would be open to communities who indicate themselves that they have an opportunity for hosting migrants, and it would come with a budget to spend on local development of any kind, then of course you will have a different outcome of this whole process. So I think it is makeable, and I hope that policymakers don't speak too much about narratives, but I think that they can make a difference by changing rules.
Very well said. Thank you so much. Ainhoa, do you want to comment any other things now in the final round?
No, well, for answering to your question, if we think this is going to be, I mean, I don't know if it's going to have to do with Ukraine or with some other place, but human mobility, human displacements, migrations have always been a reality, and I'm sure they will always be, even if it's for one. I mean, we had, yes, in 2015, but we haven't ended having during all those times, no? In the Mediterranean, we have all the time people arriving and people unfortunately not arriving, dying in the Mediterranean, and for sure, migrations will continue to be a reality. We don't know exactly if coming from Ukraine or from some other place, or from us going to some other place, as we went to many American countries, for instance, not so long ago, and to other places. So, yes.
Thank you very much. And Hakan, would you care to comment as a final intervention in the panel?
Yes, I think there is one important thing that we have agreed on today, and it's changing the narratives towards a more inclusive narrative regarding the integration of migrants. But we don't know. We know how to do that, but the political will is missing there. One thing I want to emphasize as a final point from my side is the distinction between the categories of migrant and refugee. I got the feeling that every time we said migrants here, we also meant refugees. Yes, refugees are also migrants, but they have additional rights that are defined in the international law. For example, the states are encouraged to give rights that are comparable to their own citizens, to refugees, by the 1951 Refugee Convention. So whenever a refugee is accepted, his or her rights will be comparable to the citizens except for political rights. This concerns health rights, social welfare rights, and almost everything that is in that state who has that has received that refugee. And then the second thing is that states are obliged to facilitate the naturalization of refugees. This means that they should not have to wait as long as other migrants to receive their citizenship status in the countries that they have been accepted to, and they do not have to pay fees to apply for citizenship or to apply for passport, and etc. All these are in the international law, and many of the European states are following these, but not all of them. So refugee rights and migrant rights overlap, but refugees have some more rights, and it's very important to make this distinction, and it's very important keep this to keep this distinction, so that the only legal category that we have at our hand to protect refugees, to protect people fleeing wars and etc., so that it is not diluted. It's very important to keep it as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have probably reached the end of a long day, a day in which I said, let's be brief, let's be brief, let's be brief. So I will take my own advice and I will summarize the day maybe in just a couple of words, to say that I think what emerges to me, at least, as a unifying trait is the willingness of all the projects to be very pragmatic, not only because some of us already promised at the very beginning we will have such insights for the policymakers, but that our orientation, or maybe the subject matter itself, tends to be very applicable. We have, all of us, all the projects have had concretely applicable suggestions for how to deal with the problems of migration, either as a flow, as a process, or as the migrants and refugees who are already here. And again, of course, I'm very grateful for all of you who shared your great insights and the outcomes of your research with us. So I think academics and generally research outcomes can be very useful and very pragmatic. We're not just very abstract, but we can be. However, we demonstrate we also can be very, very down to earth. And then the dilemma is, in which way can politicians hear us? Right? And for me, it still remains slightly, one of the other conclusions that I draw from the day is that despite a willingness also from the politician and the political decision makers, like the European Commission representatives have highlighted, to listen to the outcomes of the research. In fact, we are being commissioned to provide such outcomes. Our research is commissioned, in a sense, to be pragmatic and to orient towards problem-solving approaches. There is still no mechanism in place to make the most out of what we do. And it still puzzles me, and it still probably puzzles everyone, how come there is no such a mechanism. And for this, we need another policy roundtable in which we will discuss how to implement or how to make our outcomes, which are pragmatic and policy-oriented, really attractive to politicians and to decision makers. So this is one thing that is one major procedural, if you want, draw, content-free. No matter what are the policy recommendations, they still cannot have the maximized impact for a lack of procedure, I suppose. I was also talking to some of you in the coffee breaks that perhaps there should be some special funds that the European Union in its research and innovation schemes would provide for the afterlife of projects. Like all the apps we have developed, I go back to these apps because it's something very concrete, or all the other things that we have tested out, we trialed, and they worked. Now it's up to us who are academics to implement them. It doesn't seem very likely. Is it up to our universities to sell them? No, we cannot sell them because they're for free. How can we actually improve the life of others through the outcomes of our research if we have no path to do so? Or are the expectations so? Then there should be more funding for either teaching us how to do it or hiring people who are good at that. So that's one outcome that I find very interesting and slightly to me unexpected. We seem to have very good ideas, but and everybody seems to like them, but they don't get through. And I think we should have this officially into our communication and into the reports, because maybe that's a way to highlight. And I will also say one more thing about the content, and with this, I hope that I summarize the richness of the discussions we've had. I think that there is an immense convergence across these 10 different European projects that employ very different approaches methodologically, a wide span of time and context, collaborations both within and without the EU. Like the more varied crowd we cannot find. And nevertheless, there seems to be convergence when it comes to what we identify as problems that we can solve with the help of our outcomes. And of course, it's not going to be an exhaustive list. Hakan already mentioned narratives, as many other people before us. There is an issue of how we communicate things. Many people highlighted the role of local and regional actors from the politicians, but also from the project level, the role of contextualized action. Another span of recommendations have covered labor markets and how the cultural and the skill aspects should be intertwined. And of course, the politicians also seem to be thinking about that. We can even a parallel track. We also demonstrated the entrepreneurial nature of migrants. We have showcased only 2 examples. Probably we can find thousands of such examples in all the contexts that we have studied, which shows again and again and again that they are contributing a lot to our society. And what we haven't talked so much about, but we know that as is a background, is the resistance to such narratives. So in a sense, we have been united in presenting the supportive to migration and inclusion narrative, but we have only alluded or have assumed its presence, the counter narrative of the exclusivist, let's call it in a euphemistic way, narrative. So it's also interesting to think about our own perhaps biases as academics. Would we have been here or would they wanted to come here if we invited a member of the parliament who would be a very xeno-skeptic, representing a very, very skeptical to migrants party? Would they have accepted to be here? We reached out actually to everyone who works with these questions, but we haven't been met with a positive answer from people that are working actively to prevent migrants from reaching the European Union. Yeah, so it's interesting that we're talking about them, but not with them, and this is not from a willingness from our side. So that's also an interesting aspect when it comes to this idea of implementation. So this will be my interesting, like, overarching points beyond going into the specific policy recommendations. I want to end this by, of course, thanking every single project who was with us today. Thank you very much to the people from the digital meeting. I know that it's much more difficult to concentrate and be with us digitally, and your presence for 2 hours or even more is very much counting as very precious to the success of this policy roundtable. So thank you very much to the people online. Thank you very much to you here in Brussels. Thank you to the audience. And of course, a big thank you to the to my right hand, to Lily Notrot, that I'm sure all of you have been in contact with. So I think she deserves a big hand of applause. Thank you so much for that. And thank you obviously to our great hosts, the Norwegian House of Research and Innovation at University of Bergen, to Charlotte and to Thea and to Ingvild, who've been guiding us and had patience with us and helped us out. And of course to our tech support that has been very dutiful and constant on from morning to evening. So thank you very much, Ovikom, for helping us out. Done a great job. And I can only say thank you to all of you who interacted with us online. Well, it was a pleasure. For me, it was mostly a great pleasure. And I can say that we will hope to follow up this with a report. We will circulate it to everyone. We also want to acknowledge that we had a great photographer with us. Matteo, thank you. We are also going to document and share the highlights of today in order to prove that we can work together. We can be pragmatic, but we also can have a fruitful intellectual discussion. And with this, I close the event and invite everyone to relax and do not read the news. Thank you so much. Have a very good afternoon.